Hello again, everybody. We are going to be covering some review since by now we will have just finished the web quest. So some of this stuff will be stuff that you just learned about in your web quest. Other stuff will be new, but in this unit we are covering westward expansion. We are also covering United States imperialism. It is a short unit, so we are going to be hopefully done with this unit by the time we get to holiday break. So let's get started. Just so you guys know, this PowerPoint is one that I found online that I really liked because it has a lot of pictures in it. So it might look a little different compared to the ones that you usually see from me. I did go through, I edited some things, I added some things, but overall, if you see some wording that might be a little bit different from mine, it's because I did not make this PowerPoint, I just edited this PowerPoint. So, the way that this teacher starts off is with a summary, which I liked that. So, before the Civil War, most Americans saw the Great Plains as a treeless wasteland. New inventions and adaptations helped change people's perceptions. They began to see the Great Plains as a vast area to be settled. So then there's two graphics there. Before new technologies, it's called the Great Plains. Plains are grassy, flat areas, and that's what the Great Plains looks like. After new technologies, we have more people coming and building and having farms and learning how to grow things, and adapting to the Great Plains environment. Some physical characteristics of the Great Plains. There are 4 of them that I'm going to talk about. So, the physical climate. So first, if you look at that top map, that's really the area that we're talking about. This is right in the middle of the United States. And the physical features and climate were challenging to settlers because, for one thing, the land is very, very flat. Now, that's not necessarily a difficult thing, but usually if you do have rain, you'll have some crops where they're designed to be in lower lands, so they're going to get more water, some crops in higher lands to get less water. However, everything here is just one-dimensional, very flat. There's also not a lot of rainfall here, which causes a lot of dust storms. Basically, when there's no rain, all of the topsoil is very, very loose. When the wind blows, then all of that topsoil is going to create giant dust clouds, and we're actually going to talk about the Dust Bowl and all this stuff that happens in this area. But basically, it's not helping the people from come out west and settle out here. Also, the land was eroded by wind and water. So, the parts that did get water, the water would be so strong that it would peel away at the land. And then, like I just said, when you have dust, particles are moving from place to place, and they're being blown away. But we know that eventually we're going to have people settle out there. So in the next section, we're going to talk about why. Why did Americans move west? And there are multiple reasons that they did so. The first reason is there were opportunities for land ownership. To try and encourage people to move west, the government passed something called the Homestead Act of 1862. And this offered 160 acres of land to settlers if they stayed on the land for 5 years. So if you moved to the Great Plains and you stayed there for 5 years, you would get 160 acres of land. It's for you. You don't need to pay for it. And so obviously a lot of people who are poor are definitely going to want to be moving out here. We are also seeing the age of technology. We've talked about the railroads, like the Transcontinental Railroad. We also have things like plows. We're going to get into all of this later. Plows and sod houses and barbed wire and use of horses and windmills. So all of these new technological advances made life easier on the Great Plains. And here's some pictures of some of the things. Additionally, there was hope for wealth from gold and silver mining. So, I'm sure that you've heard of the California Gold Rush. This is when a whole bunch of people were going out west in search for gold because gold is worth a lot of money. So these people in this picture are panning for gold, which is where they're sifting through particles and picking out the little gold flakes. And then they'd sell those gold flakes for money. So people, when they started finding this, a ton of people went out west and would go to different places along riverbeds or lakes, and they would hunt for gold. Another reason is adventure. There's a lot of stories about the Wild West and, fighting Native Americans, and also just starting a new life and riding horses and, raising cattle. Some people wanted this new way of life where they're being part of a new adventure. And they saw this and they decided to, go for it and be part of that adventurous lifestyle. For people who were once slaves, it provided a new beginning for them. Many were hoping to escape discrimination in the South. So, if we look at these graphics, the one on the left says all colored people that want to go to Kansas can do so for $5. So if they scrounge up enough money, they can get to Kansas and then start a new life there and be free, which is amazing because before they weren't able to do that. There were still things like the Black Codes and the Jim Crow laws that were holding them back. And on the right, there's a picture of a family that did move out west. And you can see their sod home in the back, you can see there's a windmill back there, and we're going to talk about these technologies in a minute. So, like I said, we're going to talk about these new technologies, technological advances. During this era of westward expansion, people were making new things so that you could move to the Great Plains and you would be able to farm there. An example of this is the steel plow, which I'm sure if you guys have heard of John Deere. John Deere was the first inventor of the steel plow because he noticed that other plows were too weak and they were bending and breaking too much. But the steel plow was able to cut through the thick sod or thick soil in the ground. And that made it easier for people to live because they're able to till the ground so they can plant new things. Windmills provided water, so the windmill would pump valuable water from deep in the ground. So they would set up these pump stations and they would dig really, really deep, and then they would put the pump in there and the wind would bring the water up from the ground so that the people would be able to have access to fresh water even when they're not necessarily near a river, lake, or stream. People began building their houses out of sod. Since the Great Plains, there's not going to be trees there, so they learned how to make bricks out of sod, which is kind of similar to dirt. It's a bit more able to be compacted, but they would make bricks out of sod, and then they would build their homes out of this. So once they found out how to do this, they were like, oh, well, we can also have homes out there, and they can be comfortable, and they're not made out of wood, but we're able to live. Sorry, my computer just thought something. Okay. Another invention is barbed wire, which helped contain farm animals. So obviously on the Great Plains, animals are going to be spread far and wide and just go eating, fresh grass wherever they can. But barbed wire made it so that the animals didn't escape. They stayed in one area on your farm because obviously barbed wire is very thick and it's very sharp, so the animals are not going to be escaping from there. So animals were able to stay out of the farmlands, which is where the people are planting things, so the animals aren't going in and eating up all the crops. They're just staying in their own designated areas. So barbed wire is actually a huge deal, especially for farmers. People started to grow wheat, which is a very tough crop to grow. It's hard on the soil, but it could survive over the plains because the crop uses less water than most other crops. So you can see on the left and right, there's examples of people. There's people standing in a wheat field, and then on the right, there's a picture of just a very, very large wheat field. So they were able to grow because the Great Plains provided a good location for that crop to grow. Dry farming is another technological advance. It's pretty cool. Basically, this machine was created, which is pictured on the left, and where it would plant seeds very deep into the ground. So we talked about how windmills were used and people would just dig really, really deep and have these pumps, and then they would use the windmills and the pumps. And so there was water underground, and that made the soil very good. It's just that things needed to be dug a little deeper. So because of inventions like the one pictured on the left, they were able to plant seeds pretty deep into the ground so that they could get the water that's necessary for them to thrive. Of course, there's the railroad, and I know that we've talked about the railroad already, but we're going to continue to do so, and you're probably going to hear some repeat stuff. Railroads move people, products, and supplies. They were essential for settling the Great Plains. And I'm not going to mention too much about this because we already have talked about it, and I know that I'm going to mention a little bit more later on. People also realized that they could raise cattle for beef. The cattle thrive on the plains because there's plenty of grass there, so they have plenty of things to eat, and cattle are also tough enough to withstand the harsher environments. So things like dust storms or wind, or when they do have rain, dryness, the cows are able to handle that. So you're going to see large cattle farms, and you'll still see large cattle farms out there even to this day. The last thing that we're going to cover with this is the Transcontinental Railroad, which this is going to be some review, but we're also going to look at the impact of railroad on Western settlement. So the Transcontinental Railroad connected the East Coast with the West Coast of the United States. The 1,770 miles of track were completed on May 10, 1869, which transformed life across America. So transportation improved, allowing people to easily move across the country. So traveling from one end of America to the other would take months by horse. But because of the railroad, you could do it in 1 to 2 days. So now, one end of America to the other, 1 to 2 days, that's a bit fast. It was possible to make it if you were taking like a really fast train and there was no holdups or anything. But still, what we want you to get out of this is that it dramatically cut down the time that it took to get from east to west in America. Goods and supplies could now be shipped quickly. We talked about this before, where areas in the United States that didn't necessarily have access to things, because of the railroad, they were able to get access to things. People could bring wood from the east and bring them to the Great Plains. People could, if you wanted peaches from Georgia, you could eat peaches from Georgia and Kansas. If you wanted textiles from New York, you could get the textiles from New York in the Midwest or even all the way out to California. Because of railroads, transportation like this was possible and goods were able to be shipped from place to place. And finally, communication improved because when we have transportation, you usually have positive communication as well. So people are sharing ideas, it's drawing America closer together and helping Americans feel more united, especially after something that divided us so greatly as the Civil War did. So this is just the beginning to our Western expansion and imperial